Hello. Thank you for pronouncing my name so very well. That's exciting. Yes, I am talking to you about getting started. The expression on this wonderful lady's picture is usually the expression I get, measuring impact. What? So I'm going to be looking at what kind of questions we should or could be asking ourselves when we're first starting out on this journey, and looking at some of the thinking behind leading evaluation theories today. And depending on how much time we have, just have a look at some of the examples on how we're embedding measuring social impact in organizations in Alice Springs. Okay. As a researcher, my job is to ask the right questions. The most powerful questions are why questions. So why do we measure impact? Is it to convince funders to give us money? Is it to report to funders so they can continue giving us money? Is it because we want some pictures to give to our marketing team? Is it to look at which services are working and which aren't? Or is it to improve our services and find entirely new ways of working? And that's what I do. I help measure the impact organizations make, and with that, do what they do even better. That's what we're aiming for. When you first start looking at what should we be measuring, there are so many different stakeholders that all want different things at different times. And that you're already collecting some of most of the data that you need, actually. So it's not what should we be measuring. Instead, because that can be quite confusing, where do we begin? What should we be measuring? Because there's so many different people that want different things at different times. So just if you turn that question around just a little bit, who needs to know what and when? And what will they do with the data? That latter, what will they do with the data? If they are going to be happy with a 50-page report, then you're going to be going about capturing the impact you make differently. Maybe a single-page brochure with lots of pictures will be more appropriate. Your clients and beneficiaries that you're working with over time might want to be able to reflect on the journey as they're working with you. So maybe a 50-page report won't be as appropriate for them. When we look at not just whether something works, is it working, is it not working, but for whom does it work, in what context, in what respects, and how. Good understanding of what works for whom, in what context and how, and context is something that David touched on, they are the things that are portable. So if we're looking at replicating a project somewhere else, or if we're looking at comparing projects, then realist evaluation is something that might be of interest to you. Ray Pawson and Nick Tilley wrote this book, Realistic Evaluation, back in '97, and it has since become better known as realist evaluation. And another great thinker in the field is Michael Quinn Patton. He's an independent program evaluation consultant based in the US. And his most recent book, of many other books, is called Developmental Evaluation, Applying Complexity Concepts to Enhance Innovation and Use. Now I'm going to have take a look at a couple of pages from his book. The basic logic model, this should be hopefully familiar to 99% of you in the room. We've got our inputs and our resources, the money that we have, the staff that we have. We then are able to do the things that we want to do, our activities and our processes. We then have our certain outputs and our products, training materials, etc. And I've clarified here, outcomes are short-term and impact longer-term. But if you're a doctor or working in a health sector, it's the other way around, actually. And impact is short-term, and what happens after that are outcomes. So we're sticking to short-term outcomes and longer-term impact, not to be even more confusing than it already is. So over time, this is what it should look like. Fairly simple. However, it usually looks a lot more like this. We try something, we learn from it, we implement some improvements, we make some more changes, we might then even go and make some drastic changes and developments. And along the way, there are various inputs and outputs. So not quite as linear. And that is because we are dealing with the real world. Real people. People change, budgets change, political agendas change, which is why I say that research is a fumble, because we're engaging with the real world and engaging with it as unobtrusively as possible. That's what we try to do with our research hats. In the real world, we don't only engage with our programs and our stakeholders, but all the other systems that are involved. A very quick example, if we look at a program which aims to help pregnant teenagers to have healthy babies, the systems involved in these teenage mom-to-bes in her life and her well-being are not just the staff of the program that she's working with, but also her parents and other family members, her boyfriend, her friends. So all these people have an influence on her. So the way that you deliver that program depends on all these other systems. And then we can look even further at the institutional influences, the school system, the church, the general youth culture that she's involved with, community-based youth programs and clinics, whether she has access to them, whether she doesn't, all make a difference to the result of whether she's going to have a healthy baby, not just your program. How the program is delivered to create the maximum amount of impact depends on how we engage with these systems. The better we understand these systems, the better we can tailor our work. In Mr. Patton's book, he refers to his friend Henry Mintzberg, one of the world's leading thinkers and writers on management. Very clever man. And Patton read this book and rang his friend up and said, "Oh, you've written a book about evaluation." And Henry didn't quite agree at first, but let's have a look. So this is his theory on strategy. Is anyone familiar with Mintzberg's work on strategies? Good. We have our intended strategy. We are going to do X, Y, Z. Great. But, again, we're living in the real world where things change, so some things will be unrealized, and we'll end up with some of the things that we initially thought we were going to be doing. So we've got our unrealized stuff and the stuff that we deliberately engaged with. And that's usually what we report on. This is what we did, and this is what we didn't do. But we're a pretty innovative crew. We're here because we care to make a difference. That's what we try to do. So no matter what we do, we make changes and we invent stuff along the way, and that's some of our emergent strategy. So in the real world, why wouldn't we just report on not just what we initially intended, but then our realized strategy? When we work in situations where there's high uncertainty, it's dynamic, we are looking at changing systems, because we're bold like that. We need an adaptive management that can cope with these elements. Our plan on paper, like I said, research is a fumble. So the plan on paper will mutate over time, and you need to be able to be flexible, to be able to respond to that. Now, if we replace the word strategy with outcomes and impact, we have our intended outcomes. We then have some of our unrealized outcomes. We have our deliberate outcomes, our emergent outcomes, beyond the unanticipated, not only what we anticipated and unanticipated, but even beyond that. And then we have our realized outcomes. So if our focus, and by our, I mean those on the ground, those on the top, the social worker as well as her line manager, as well as the grant maker, all of us, if we would concentrate on our realized outcomes, we would work in a world where there are no failures, only lessons learned. That's why data is so exciting. For me, personally, it's what gets me up in the morning. In a world where we truly embrace innovation, not what we did do, what we didn't do, but actually the lessons learned along the way. Okay, how are we doing for time? We're good, good. Lunch is only 20 minutes away, okay? Bear with us. Okay, so intended strategy, real life strategy. Let's go home to where it's warm. I don't know about you. I was hoping to be warmer here with the lights, but it's not. Alice Springs. Moved to Alice Springs 2 years ago. And when we first arrived, I delivered one of our major social impact workshops. And we had about 8 different local not-for-profit organizations attend. And I had the usual reception. Yep, this is great. This is wonderful. But we don't have the money or the resources to do any of this. Plus, they had the additional challenges of working interculturally, where traditional tools, so interviews and set up focus groups and surveys, they're out of the question. There are many creative and valid alternatives. Observation and working together, working collaboratively are all forms of capturing data, but that's not what I'm going to be talking about today. But doing it systematically, that is the challenge. So, some of the work that we're involved with in Alice Springs. The Desert Hub is an intermediary that supports social purpose ventures in Desert Australia. Now, the University of Sydney's Innovation and Entrepreneurship Research Group, that is working on the strategic frame that David mentions. The Desert Hub is in partnership with them. And we're doing a study looking at what are social enterprises capturing, what are the gaps, and where can we help them with. So the University of Sydney, there you go, logo, check. This is what the framework actually looks like. Those of you who are attending the workshop in the evening today will go through this in a lot more detail. But what's great about this initial framework is that you see all those arrows? The mission informs your inputs, and the inputs informs your mission. Your mission informs what you do and how you reflect, and that then again goes back to what you're doing. It's all interconnected. So it changes. It allows for you to innovate, make changes, go back to it. We use the framework as a starting point to guide our work with working with, we've got 5 organizations. And we're tailoring this framework to suit their individual needs. Now, I just wanted to, what's the difference between a framework and tools? Because it gets a bit confusing, all these lingo and terms. This is a framework, so who's going to capture what and when? And you can use a whole load of different tools to help you capture specific bits of information. You can use your surveys and interviews and focus groups. You can use photos. One of the programs that I'm working on separately, young people, youth leadership group, and they're going to be taking photos, and then at the end we collate them, put it in a comic strip, and so at the end of the program they can go home and remember all the different things that they were doing during their program. Camcorders, audio records, outcome stars, social return on investment, a participatory self-evaluation process called the project profile tool, most significant change, outcomes mapping, and the list goes on. There's lots there. And for some of the work that you do, one of these might work really well. You might want to change it, shift it around, make it work for you. Be creative. You don't have to start from scratch. A lot of people have done a lot of thinking about this in recent years and prior. Okay. 2 of the organizations that we're working with. One is, I'm going to try this, bear with me. Nganampa Walcha Payanchaku Chutaku Aboriginal Corporation, also known as Purple House, much easier to pronounce. They provide dialysis treatment and try to help their patients be home on country as much as possible. They're a wonderful organization. I can stand here all day telling about how awesome they are. But they have also a really good website, so you can look them up for yourself. What we're doing with them is looking at knowledge management. Alice Springs is probably not a new thing for most of you here, but we have a very high turnover. 48% of residents move out of Alice Springs within 5 years. It's a very high turnover. So we're looking at knowledge management, and we're looking at the power of observation. how observation is a valid tool to capture outcomes and impact. They're already doing it. We're just looking at how we can make that systematically. The Arid Lands Environment Center, ALEC, is another one of our case studies. They're pretty unique in the sense that they are both an advocate and actually deliver various services. So for instance, they have the anti-nuclear campaign, but they also deliver the Alice Water Smart project, which does over 1,000 household audits in water audits. Again, great website, so if you want to find out more about them, look at them. So again, we're looking with them at better knowledge management, so that should the coordinator do something else tomorrow, we still have all of his lessons learned of his time there for the next people that join in. And we're looking at how ALEC does a lot of reporting. They have various funds from different people and organizations, and they do a lot of reporting, and a lot of the time it just feels like a waste of energy, all this time just writing reports. How can they make that as useful an activity, as fruitful an activity as possible? Lastly, I work with DKA, Desert Knowledge Australia. Essentially, it looks at connecting the right people to and organizations to work together to come up with different ways to address some of the unique challenges that we face in the desert. We love our desert, but we have some little challenges here and there. My role as the Innovation and Development Officer is to ensure that not only are all of DKA's programs innovative, but that they're continuously innovating, so that we're learning by doing and doing by learning, learning by doing and doing by learning, and how we, again, make that systematically. This is a new way of working for DKA, and I'm going to just tell you with 2 slides on how we're not doing it, but how we are doing it. Okay, this is how we don't do it. I don't just step in and tell everyone, all right, tomorrow we are going to be able to report on our impact. As of now, you also not only have to look at your inputs and your outputs, but your outcomes and your impacts too. That's not going to happen. Everyone's already busy. They're already spending more hours in the office than they want to, and on the ground. So it's a completely different way of working. You can't just add on an evaluation last minute. That doesn't help us learn from what we're doing. We might get some useful data, but we don't really get to the exciting stuff. And it's not just our staff. We're looking at all our stakeholders. Our funders need to know what we're doing and why we're doing it, and getting them on board. We're looking at our beneficiaries. We're not just here to teach you how to do stuff. We actually really want to know what you think, and then next time we can do it better because you've had a great chance of giving us your input. So we instead, rather than just telling the people, okay, tomorrow, as of tomorrow, we're changing it, no. It's a gradual process, and everyone needs to be on board. What am I going to get out of it? That question needs to be asked to everyone. So we're not just looking at DKA's objectives of that particular program, but the stakeholders' perspectives as well. Okay, I can keep talking about this, but I'm going to start wrapping up. So, if I were to leave you with just 3 things, these would be it. You can measure anything. I disagree with Helen a little bit. I do think you can measure anything, especially if you can gather the data before, during, after, and a while after, and a while after, and a while after. Sure, it's resource intensive, and we don't have to do this with everything, just the bits that really matter. Disseminate wisely. If you have gone through the trouble of capturing this invaluable data, share it. Share it with your neighbors, share it with your funders, share it with your beneficiaries, share it with the university. Who needs to know this stuff? Share it. Disseminate wisely. Don't just send out the 50-page report. Maybe a DVD or a 10-minute documentary would be more appropriate. So be creative, do it wisely, and take emergence seriously. So we touched on emergence when we looked at Mintzberg strategies. So going beyond unanticipated consequence, be generally open to not just do some little tweaks and improvements here and there, but actually how can we drastically change to make serious impact. So if I were to add a fourth one on there, it'd be collaborate, because we can't do this on our own. We need everyone's involvement. Any questions?